Joining us now, the chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, Senator Bob Menendez of New Jersey. Senator, welcome back to Fox News Sunday.
Good to be with you, Brett.
Where do you see the war in Ukraine right now? Are sanctions working against Vladimir Putin?
Well, economists predict that the Russian economy, GDP, will contract by 15%. That wipes out 15 years of gain for Russia. Even Russian economists say that it will have 10% of GDP loss. That's a huge blow to Russia. Europe's latest effort that they hopefully will consolidate this week of having a oil and gas embargo against Russia will be a huge blow. And so as someone who has been the author of many sanctions, it has a tail to it. It takes some time to have an effect, but it is having an effect. And I think what's having even a bigger effect is the West's commitment to Ukraine. This is a test for the West, whether or not we will allow a country, in this case Russia, led by Putin, to ultimately violate the international order and erase the boundaries of a country by force.
This is the British Foreign Secretary a few days ago. Take a listen, if you would.
We're doubling down. We will keep going further and faster to push Russia out of the whole of Ukraine.
Do you agree with the British Foreign Secretary? What does winning in Ukraine look like? Is it pushing Russia out?
It's Ukraine keeping its sovereignty, and it will be for President Zelensky and the Ukrainian people to decide what concessions, if any, they will make. And of course, after the horrific acts that Putin has committed, the butcher of Moscow, and the war crimes that he has committed, it's hard to understand what the Ukrainians could accept. But certainly, it is at the end of the day that Ukraine is a freestanding, sovereign country that determines its own future. What that means in the context of territory is something for the Ukrainians to decide for themselves.
How much do you fear that Russia does use some sort of nuclear weapon, tactical or otherwise?
Well, one of my concerns is that, ironically, the more success that the Ukrainians have, the greater the risk that Putin will do something because he's losing and has to save face at home. And so the potential of a chemical, biological, or tactical nuclear weapon may grow as a result of that. And that is a real concern. Understand that Putin did this in Syria. Unfortunately, the world didn't care about Syria. But he used chemical weapons in Syria. He used indiscriminate bombing of civilian sites, hospitals, schools, and more. And yet, you know, the world didn't care at that moment. So he is capable of doing that. And of course, there are chemical weapon conventions with consequences for the use of chemical weapons if he were to do that.
The president's asked for $33 billion in addition to what has already been funded. When does the Senate consider a Ukraine bill?
Well, it'll be my hope that it will do so soon, hopefully either this week or the next. Of course, if there is consensus, if there is an agreement, as you know, anything can go through the Senate through unanimous consent. If somehow there is a desire to start picking it apart or having amendments to it, it could last longer. But time is of the essence. The howitzers, for example, that we're providing the Ukrainians, many which are on the ground already, with long-range missile capacity, is going to help them in what is now a new phase of the war. And so all that we can do to help the Ukrainians fight for themselves and achieve their freedom is critical, because what we don't want is Putin ultimately to think that not only can he win in Ukraine, but advance beyond it, and that creates a risk for us and our NATO allies.
So do you think, on that bill, do you think COVID money will have to be attached to that Ukrainian funding, or vice versa, to get that all through?
Well, my view is that they're both important. COVID is about preparing for any new iteration of a new wave, a new element of the virus. Ukraine is about, defending the international order and making sure that we can help Ukraine defeat Russia so it doesn't advance to a country for which we are committed, for example, under NATO, which then would require our sons and daughters to fight abroad. So they're both distinctive, but they're all essential to the the national security, one in terms of its health security, one in terms of the security of the international order and our ability to defeat Russia there, so we don't have to send our sons and daughters abroad.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I want to turn to another foreign policy hotspot, and that is Iran and the Iran negotiations. This is Deputy Secretary of State Wendy Sherman. Last time I had her here on Fox News Sunday talking about that.
You know, we are very concerned about what Iran is doing, but imagine these Iranians with a nuclear weapon. We need to get that off the table so we can address their malign behavior in the Middle East, and we will do all of the above. But first, we've got to get this deal, and it is not yet closed.
Do you agree with that premise, first of all? The State Department claimed its patience wasn't unlimited when it came to Iran and these negotiations and a new agreement, but that was a year ago. So is the administration somehow getting taken advantage of by Iran?
Well, look, we are all in agreement that Iran cannot be allowed to possess a nuclear weapon. It will change the entire nature of the region. We will have a nuclear arms race in the region, and our ally, the State of Israel, will have an existential threat. We cannot tolerate that. By the same token, we were told by the administration that if the negotiations didn't conclude by the end of February, that in fact the time that would be lost and what we would gain would be of very little importance, value to us. Well, now it's the end of April. And so if the end of February wasn't going to buy us what we need, certainly the end of April is not. And the returning to the agreement, especially when there's not a one-year breakout, but only a 6-month breakout, doesn't really give us what we need. We don't deal with Iran's ballistic missiles, for which our CENTCOM commander says there is overmatch by Iran and its proxies in the region in terms of the number of missiles and places they can fire them against even Iron Dome and other of our allies in the region. We won't be dealing with the ultimate threat. So we have to stop, yes, Iran's proliferation and missiles, and we also have to stop their pathway to a nuclear weapon. There's 3 elements of that. They already have the missile element. They're on the verge of having the enrichment element. Unfortunately, President Trump left a deal without a strategy, and then they accelerated that. And the third part is the detonation, which they don't have yet. These are the things that we must focus on to stop Iran from having a nuclear weapon.
But I'm hearing from your answer, do you want the administration to pull back from this table?
I want the administration to understand that no deal is better than a bad deal. And a deal that only gives us 6 months from my perspective without dealing with some of the other elements, you know, it's 2022. It's not 2014. Some of the sunsets of the original deal, for all its imperfections, as you know, I didn't support the original deal, are even closer in terms of ending a pathway where Iran could ultimately achieve its goal. So from my perspective, unless there are other elements of the deal, that would not be a good deal. And, you know, and lifting of the IRGC designation as a terrorist organization, I think is also critically important not to take place. They need to keep the designation on it. That may be, in fact, one of the stumbling blocks of having a deal at the end of the day.
Senator Menendez, thank you. Always good to talk with you.
Good to be with you.